A 14-day food trick cleans your liver and melts belly fat. Why didn't anyone tell you? And if you're eating salads every day, drinking green smoothies every morning, and cutting out processed food, you may be doing everything right and still running a liver so congested it is silently blocking fat loss from happening at all. Not because your food is bad, not because you lack discipline, but because the specific foods most people consider clean eating are missing the 3 compounds that tell your liver to stop storing fat and start releasing it. Compounds that work on a 14-day biological timeline, not a calorie timeline. The gap between the liver you think you have and the liver you actually have is the single most overlooked explanation for why belly fat in particular resists everything you throw at it after 45. Here is what nobody in mainstream nutrition ever explains clearly enough. Your liver is not a passive filter. It is the most metabolically active organ in your body. It does several hundred documented functions simultaneously, and among the most consequential is this. It decides hour by hour whether the fat circulating in your bloodstream gets burned for energy or gets packaged and sent back to storage. When the liver is functioning the way it is designed to, it processes incoming fat, shuttles it into the metabolic furnace, and exports the byproducts cleanly. When the liver is congested, a state that researchers now call non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or NAFLD, which affects roughly 38% of American adults according to data published in Hepatology, it shifts from fat-burning coordinator to fat storage facilitator. The organ that was supposed to help you burn fat becomes the reason you cannot. And here is the mechanism almost nobody in the wellness space ever walks you through in full. The invisible villain in this story is not sugar, not saturated fat, and not alcohol. It is a compound called diacylglycerol, abbreviated as DAG, that accumulates inside liver cells when the liver is overwhelmed. DAG is not a toxin from the outside. Your liver manufactures it when it receives more fat and fructose than it can process at one time. When DAG builds up inside hepatocytes, the primary working cells of the liver ekakase, it activates a signaling molecule called protein kinase C epsilon, or PKCE. PKCE then does something that costs you weeks and months of dietary effort. It impairs insulin signaling at the liver level, not the whole body insulin resistance people talk about in diabetes conversations, something more specific and more damaging to fat loss. It makes the liver insulin resistant while the rest of your body remains normal. Your pancreas, sensing that the liver is not responding to insulin properly, compensates by producing more insulin. Blood insulin climbs, and elevated insulin, circulating chronically above the threshold that hormone-sensitive lipase, the enzyme that releases stored fat, requires in order to operate, keeps fat locked in your fat cells 24 hours a day. You are not failing to lose belly fat because you lack willpower. Your liver is running a chemistry sequence that makes fat storage the path of least resistance regardless of what you eat. The reason your belly specifically holds fat longer than anywhere else is anatomical, not cosmetic. Visceral fat, the fat stored deep inside the abdominal cavity around your organs, drains directly through the portal vein into your liver. Every time visceral fat releases free fatty acids, those fatty acids arrive at the liver first, before reaching the lungs, the heart, or the muscles. A congested liver cannot process that incoming load efficiently, so it repackages the excess as very low-density lipoprotein particles and sends them back into circulation, where they get deposited right back into visceral fat. The belly fat is feeding the liver, and the congested liver is feeding the belly fat. This is not a metaphor. This is documented hepatic lipid recycling, described in a 2017 paper in the Journal of Hepatology by Stefan and colleagues at the University of Tübingen. You are watching a closed loop. Breaking that loop requires a specific intervention directed at the liver itself, not at total caloric intake, not at macros, and not at exercise frequency. This is where the 14-day timeline enters the picture, and I want to be precise about what 14 days refers to because precision is the only thing that separates biology from wishful thinking. Liver cells, hepatocytes, have a renewal cycle. Damaged or fat-infiltrated hepatocytes do not repair instantaneously. Research on hepatic lipid clearance, including work from the research group of Dr. Roy Taylor at Newcastle University in the United Kingdom, whose dietary studies on liver fat were published in Diabetologia and in Cell Metabolism, shows that targeted dietary intervention can produce measurable reductions in hepatic fat content in as little as 7 to 14 days. Not complete reversal of years of accumulation, but measurable, meaningful reductions in the intracellular fat load that impairs liver signaling, enough to shift the liver from fat storage mode back toward fat processing mode in that window. Taylor's work showed that participants who reduced hepatic fat through dietary changes showed improvements in insulin sensitivity within 2 weeks that were detectable on magnetic resonance spectroscopy. The liver did not need months to begin responding. It needed the right inputs, consistently delivered for 2 weeks. The 3 compounds that drive this shift are not exotic, they are not pharmaceutical. They are specific food-derived molecules that your liver uses as raw material for its own repair and lipid-clearing machinery. Mainstream nutrition science knows about all 3 of them. They appear in the peer-reviewed literature consistently. What the wellness industry has failed to do is connect them into a single protocol with exact quantities, a specific sequence, and an honest explanation of why the timing across 14 days matters. That is what I am going to do in this video. Before I give you the protocol, I need to walk you through what is happening inside your liver on days 1 through 14 when the inputs change. Because understanding the sequence is what makes the protocol feel rational rather than arbitrary. If you just want the list, this is not the right video. If you want to understand why the biology actually works, stay with me. The 3-part sequence I am going to describe, call it the flux protocol, delivers changes at the level of hepatocyte signaling that no supplement stack, no detox tea, and no juice cleanse has ever been shown to produce in a controlled human trial. And by the end, I will also hand you the single most common mistake people make in week 2 that cancels everything they built in week 1. Let me start with what your liver looks like right now if you are a typical American adult eating what most nutritionists would call a reasonably healthy diet. The standard American liver, not the liver of someone eating fast food every day, but the liver of someone who considers themselves health conscious, who eats salads, avoids fried food most of the time, and drinks alcohol only on weekends, carries on average between 5 and 12% fat by weight. Research from the Dallas Heart Study, which measured hepatic fat content via magnetic resonance spectroscopy in nearly 3,000 participants across Dallas County, found that 31% of participants had hepatic fat above 5%, the clinical threshold for fatty liver. And the prevalence was substantially higher in people over 45. A liver carrying more than 5% fat by weight is already in early metabolic dysfunction. The DAG accumulation is already happening. The PKCE pathway is already partially activated. The insulin resistance at the liver level is already partially engaged. And the person carrying that liver may feel completely fine. No symptoms, no jaundice, no fatigue beyond what they attribute to aging. The liver has no pain receptors. Congestion accumulates silently. You feel nothing. The fat continues building in your belly, and the standard dietary advice, eat less, move more, reduce carbs, addresses everything except the organ running the metabolic traffic control for your entire body. I want to pause here and be direct about something personal, because context matters, and I think it is relevant to how you receive what I am about to describe. About 3 years ago, I went through a standard annual physical and came out with numbers that looked fine on paper. Cholesterol in range, blood pressure acceptable, blood sugar normal, fasting glucose. My doctor told me I was doing well for my age. 2 months later, I had an ultrasound for an unrelated reason. The radiologist's report came back with a note. Mild hepatic steatosis, fatty liver. Nobody had flagged it. Nobody had checked for it in my standard panel. And when I looked at my lifestyle against the research, I had done everything that conventional health guidance would classify as responsible. I was not eating fast food. I was not drinking heavily. I was exercising. And yet the organ that orchestrates fat metabolism had been quietly accumulating fat for years. Visible on imaging, invisible in my blood work and in how I felt. It was my wife who pulled the Taylor studies, who found the hepatic fat clearance research, who connected the dietary compounds to the documented mechanisms. That is what sent me down the path I am going to walk you through now. I am not offering my experience as clinical evidence. I am offering it because the disconnect between standard medical screening and actual liver metabolic health is not unique to me. It is structural, and it affects tens of millions of people who have no idea their liver is running in congested mode right now. The three compounds I mentioned at the end of the last section are not equal in their mechanisms or in their timing. They operate on the liver through three completely distinct biological pathways, and the reason the 14-day protocol works is that those pathways are sequential. Each one opens the door for the next. Delivering all three simultaneously, which is what most supplement protocols attempt to do, produces a fraction of the effect of delivering them in the right order across the right window. Let me walk you through each one with the biology underneath it. The first compound is choline. Not the choline you hear mentioned in passing in conversations about eggs. The specific biochemical role choline plays inside liver cells that the wellness industry has almost entirely failed to communicate accurately. Choline is a water-soluble nutrient your body uses to construct phosphatidylcholine, the structural backbone of very low-density lipoprotein particles, or VLDL. Your liver's primary mechanism for exporting fat, the biological equivalent of clearing inventory out of an overloaded warehouse, is packaging that fat into VLDL particles and releasing them into circulation. VLDL production requires phosphatidylcholine. If your liver does not have enough choline to build the packaging material, it cannot export the fat sitting inside its cells. The fat stays, it accumulates, and the DAG pathway I described earlier intensifies. A 2017 meta-analysis published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, examining dietary choline intake and hepatic fat content across multiple cohorts, found a significant inverse relationship between choline consumption and prevalence of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. People consuming more choline had meaningfully lower rates of liver fat accumulation. They had more packaging material. Their livers could export fat more efficiently. The specific population most likely to be choline deficient is women after menopause and men over 50. Research by Dr. Steven Zeisel at the University of North Carolina Nutrition Research Institute showed that estrogen regulates the gene responsible for endogenous choline synthesis in the liver. Before menopause, women can synthesize more choline internally. After menopause, that capacity drops significantly, and men over 50 who never had the estrogen-driven synthesis advantage are chronically under-consuming choline relative to what their liver needs for efficient VLDL export. The adequate intake established by the National Academy of Medicine is 550 milligrams per day for men and 425 milligrams per day for women. Government dietary surveys consistently show that the average American adult consumes somewhere between 250 and 350 milligrams per day, roughly half the recommended amount. The liver is short on the raw material it needs to clear its own fat load every single day, and most people have no idea this is happening. 3 whole eggs per day, not egg whites, with the yolks intact, delivers approximately 440 milligrams of choline. Pair that with a 3-ounce serving of salmon twice in the first week, and you are consistently above the adequate intake threshold for the first time, possibly in years. That is the choline input the liver needs to rebuild its VLDL export capacity. The warehouse starts clearing the backlog. The second compound is sulforaphane. This is where the biology gets more precise and where the gap between what the research actually shows and what the wellness industry communicates becomes most visible. Sulforaphane is a phytochemical produced when cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, broccoli sprouts, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, are chopped or chewed. It is not present in the vegetable itself. It is produced by an enzymatic reaction between a precursor called glucoraphanin and an enzyme called myrosinase when the plant's cell walls are broken. Heat destroys myrosinase. Steaming broccoli for more than 4 minutes reduces sulforaphane yield by approximately 40%. Boiling it eliminates the majority of the enzyme entirely. Most people who believe they are getting sulforaphane from their diet are cooking it out of existence. One of the cleaner examples of a nutritional intervention that fails not because the food is wrong, but because the preparation method was never explained. What sulforaphane does inside liver cells is activate a transcription factor called NRF2, nuclear factor erythroid 2-related factor 2. NRF2 is the master regulator of the liver's antioxidant and detoxification enzyme systems. When NRF2 is activated, it switches on a cascade of liver protective genes that function as the liver's repair crew. They break down the oxidative byproducts of fat accumulation, reduce inflammation at the hepatocyte level, and directly impair the PKCE pathway, driving insulin resistance in the congested liver. A 2014 study published in Cancer Prevention Research by Dr. Jed Fahey and colleagues at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine documented measurable NRF2 activation in human liver tissue from dietary sulforaphane at doses achievable through food. Not pharmacological supplementation, food, specifically broccoli sprouts, which contain 10 to 100 times higher concentrations of glucoraphanin than mature broccoli, consumed raw or very lightly steamed for no more than 90 seconds to preserve myrosinase activity. 2 tablespoons of raw broccoli sprouts daily provides approximately 70 to 100 milligrams of glucoraphanin, sufficient to generate meaningful NRF2 activation. If sprouts are unavailable, 1 cup of raw broccoli consumed with a pinch of mustard seed powder works because mustard seed contains its own myrosinase. Research from Elizabeth Jeffrey at the University of Illinois, published in the British Journal of Nutrition in 2012, showed that adding mustard seed to cooked broccoli partially restores sulforaphane yield even after cooking has deactivated the vegetable's own enzyme. Almost no one in mainstream nutrition ever explains this. The general recommendation is simply to eat more vegetables. The specific instruction, raw sprouts or mustard rescued cooked broccoli, requires understanding the enzyme chemistry, and the gap between that specificity and the surface recommendation is exactly where the biological effect disappears. Here is where I want to name the mainstream betrayal directly. The research on choline and liver fat, sulforaphane and NRF2 activation, and the third compound I am about to describe has been sitting in peer-reviewed journals for a decade or more. It is not obscure. It is not contested. The Johns Hopkins sulforaphane work, Zaisil's choline studies, Taylor's hepatic fat clearance trials, these appear in flagship journals with rigorous methodology. And yet the dietary guidance that reaches most Americans does not reflect this mechanistic specificity. The advice is to eat more vegetables, eat less fat, lose weight. Not to eat 2 tablespoons of raw broccoli sprouts, because myrosinase generates sulforaphane, which activates NRF2, which dismantles the PKCE pathway, keeping your liver insulin resistant. The specificity is the intervention. The vague recommendation is not. If you have spent years eating healthy by conventional standards and your belly fat has not moved, the guidance you received operated at the level of food categories rather than food chemistry. The gap between those 2 levels of resolution is where the biology actually lives. The third compound is betaine, also called trimethylglycine. Its role in liver fat clearance runs through a pathway called 1-carbon metabolism, a biochemical cycle your liver uses to process methyl groups involved in gene regulation, DNA repair, and phosphatidylcholine resynthesis. Choline builds the VLDL export particles. Betaine recycles the molecular intermediates produced when choline is consumed in that process, converting homocysteine back into methionine and regenerating the methyl donors. The liver needs to keep VLDL production running continuously. Without adequate betaine, the recycling machinery slows, homocysteine accumulates, and the entire export system gradually runs dry, even when choline intake is adequate. Choline and betaine are not separate interventions. They are 2 phases of the same system. The highest dietary sources of betaine are cooked spinach, approximately 600 milligrams per 100 grams, and quinoa with approximately 390 milligrams per 100 grams cooked. 1 cup of cooked spinach and a half cup of cooked quinoa daily delivers approximately 700 to 800 milligrams of betaine, a meaningful daily contribution to the 1-carbon cycle your liver depends on. What makes the 14-day timeline coherent rather than arbitrary is the convergence of these 3 pathways across that specific window. In the first 3 to 4 days, choline intake begins restoring the liver's VLDL export capacity. The warehouse starts clearing. In days 4 through 10, sulforaphane-driven NRF2 activation begins dismantling the oxidative environment and the PKCE signaling that created liver-level insulin resistance. The dock manager starts losing authority. Across the full 14 days, betaine sustains the methyl recycling system that allows both processes to continue without depleting their own raw materials. The biology is sequential. On day 15, if you have delivered all 3 compounds in their effective forms, choline from whole eggs and fatty fish, sulforaphane from raw sprouts or mustard rescued broccoli, betaine from spinach and quinoa, your liver's relationship with incoming fat is measurably different from what it was on day 1. Not resolved, not fixed forever, shifted out of the congested metabolic loop that was making belly fat loss biologically impossible regardless of your caloric choices. Now, I want to give you the flux protocol with exact numbers, because understanding the mechanism without a structured delivery system produces the same outcome as having no protocol at all. You absorb the biology and change nothing because the biology by itself does not tell you what to eat at 7 in the morning. The flux protocol has 3 components. F is for front-load choline before 10 in the morning. L is for lock-in sulforaphane at the raw preparation window. U is for use betaine as the evening anchor. And at the end, I will describe the mistake in week 2 that quietly cancels the progress built in week 1. A mistake that involves a food almost everyone considers liver healthy. The F component, front-loading choline before 10 in the morning, is not arbitrary timing. It connects directly to the circadian biology of VLDL export. Research published in the journal Cell Metabolism by Folmers and colleagues, examining liver gene expression across the 24-hour cycle, showed that the enzymes responsible for VLDL assembly and export in the liver follow a circadian rhythm with peak expression occurring in the morning hours. Your liver is biologically primed to run its fat export machinery at maximum capacity between roughly 6 and 10 in the morning. If you deliver the choline substrate your liver needs to build those VLDL particles during the window, when the export machinery is already running at its daily peak, you are loading raw material into a factory at the exact moment the production line is operating fastest. 3 whole eggs consumed with the yolks before 10 in the morning. If eggs are not practical on a given day, 2 ounces of canned salmon on the side delivers approximately 60 milligrams of additional choline and adds meaningful protein to support the morning hormonal environment. The specific target is reaching 400 milligrams of choline in this first meal window. That number matters because it crosses the threshold where hepatic phosphatidylcholine availability shifts from limiting factor to adequate supply for VLDL construction. People over 50 need to apply one additional consideration here. As you age, the efficiency of choline absorption from food declines modestly, and the baseline rate of phosphatidylcholine turnover in liver cell membranes increases. The 400 milligram morning target functions as a minimum floor for someone over 50, not an optimal ceiling. The 3-egg baseline is the foundation, adjusting upward by adding a small serving of fatty fish at breakfast. On days you can manage, it keeps the delivery above that floor without requiring any exotic additions. The L component, locking in sulforaphane at the raw preparation window, addresses the practical reality that broccoli sprouts are available in most American grocery stores, but are unfamiliar enough that people buy them once, use half the container, and never restock. The 2 tablespoon daily target is the minimum effective dose for NRF2 activation based on the Fahey laboratory data. 2 tablespoons is approximately 30 grams of fresh sprouts, less than a handful. They have a mild, slightly peppery flavor that disappears entirely when combined with a small amount of olive oil, lemon juice, and whatever protein you are eating at lunch. They do not require preparation, they require only that they be consumed raw. If sprouts genuinely are not accessible in your area, the mustard seed rescue for cooked broccoli is the documented alternative. 1 teaspoon of ground yellow mustard seed added to 1 cup of broccoli that has been steamed for no more than 3 minutes and then allowed to rest for 5 minutes before the mustard is added. The resting period allows the residual enzyme activity to partially resume, restores sulforaphane production to approximately 40 to 50% of what raw broccoli would produce. That is not equivalent to raw sprouts, but it is a meaningful dose in the context of a 14-day dietary intervention, where 0 sulforaphane is the realistic alternative for most people eating conventional American diets. The timing of sulforaphane consumption within the day does not carry the same circadian significance as choline. What matters for sulforaphane is consistency, the same amount every day across the full 14 days, because NRF2 activation is not a one-time event. It is a sustained signal. The PKCE pathway that sulforaphane is working to dismantle reactivates when the NRF2 signal drops. You are not triggering a repair and walking away. You are holding a biological environment that allows repair to occur continuously across the 14-day window. Missing 3 or 4 days in the middle of the protocol does not simply slow progress. It partially resets the NRF2 activation state and requires the first several days of consistent exposure to rebuild it. This is the mechanism behind why 14 days of daily delivery produces results that a sporadic 3 weeks on and off approach does not. The U component, using betaine as the evening anchor, takes advantage of the same circadian liver biology in reverse. If the morning is when the liver's fat export machinery runs at peak capacity, the evening is when hepatic 1-carbon metabolism runs its maintenance cycle, repairing methylation patterns and recycling the molecular intermediates that will be needed again the following morning. Delivering betaine in the evening meal provides the raw material for that overnight maintenance cycle. 1 cup of cooked spinach at dinner, which most Americans can incorporate without significantly altering their existing meal structure, delivers approximately 600 milligrams of betaine. Adding a half cup of cooked quinoa as a side starch brings the total betaine delivery at that meal to approximately 1,000 milligrams. That is the full daily target delivered in a single evening meal. The rest of the day's eating does not need to change for this component to function. The liver runs its methylation maintenance while you sleep, and the betaine is already there when it needs it. I want to say something about fructose here because it is the most common invisible saboteur of the 14-day protocol, and it operates through the same DAG pathway I described at the start of this video. The liver metabolizes fructose differently from glucose. Glucose enters every cell in the body and gets distributed across tissues for energy use. Fructose is almost entirely captured by the liver on first pass through the portal circulation. When fructose arrives at the liver faster than it can be converted to energy, the excess gets converted to fat through a process called de novo lipogenesis. De novo lipogenesis produces, specifically and directly, diacylglycerol, the same DAG that activates PKCE, the same PKCE that creates liver insulin resistance, the same liver insulin resistance that locks your belly fat in place. A 2012 paper in the Journal of Hepatology by Lim and colleagues at the University of California, San Francisco, showed that fructose restriction alone, without caloric restriction, produced significant reductions in hepatic de novo lipogenesis within 9 days in overweight subjects. 9 days, not months. The liver responded to fructose removal faster than any other dietary variable tested. The foods delivering the highest fructose loads in the average American diet are not candy bars. They are foods most people associate with healthy eating. Fruit juice, dried fruit, sweetened yogurt, agave nectar marketed as a natural alternative to sugar, and the granola bars that line the health food aisle. A single 8-ounce glass of orange juice delivers 25 grams of fructose. A quarter cup of raisins contains approximately 16 grams. Consuming either of these while running the flux protocol is functionally equivalent to mopping a wet floor while the faucet is still running. You are clearing DAGI through the choline and sulforaphane pathways while simultaneously regenerating it through the fructose pathway at a faster rate. The mistake that most commonly invalidates the flux protocol in week 2 is not abandoning the eggs or forgetting the sprouts. It is adding fruit to the morning routine in an attempt to round out the nutritional profile of the protocol. The logic is intuitive. You're eating eggs and salmon and spinach, and this feels incomplete without something fresh and colorful. A banana, an apple, a handful of grapes, a morning smoothie with mixed berries, and a squeeze of honey. Every one of those additions delivers meaningful fructose into a liver that is just beginning to clear its DAG backlog in days 7 through 10. The timing is maximally damaging because the liver is at its most responsive to dietary input in week 2. The choline and sulforaphane have begun shifting the metabolic environment, the cleaning crew has arrived and is operating, and the fructose load sends a de novo lipogenesis signal that partially reverses what the protocol has built. Whole low fructose fruit, blueberries, raspberries, strawberries, consumed in modest amounts, no more than half a cup per day, does not produce the same DAG generation as high fructose options and is compatible with the protocol. The distinction is not fruit versus no fruit. It is fructose load per serving, and the specific numbers matter more than the food category. If you are going to run the flux protocol starting this week, 3 eggs before 10 in the morning, 2 tablespoons of raw broccoli sprouts at lunch, 1 cup of cooked spinach at dinner, no juice or dried fruit, 14 days straight, comment the word flux below. I read every comment and I will follow up in 2 weeks with data from the people in this community who have been tracking their results, because the pattern I have been seeing in the responses is more specific than I expected and deserves its own video. The next video in this series goes one level deeper into what happens after day 14, specifically how to structure the maintenance phase so that the liver does not drift back into the congested state, and what the research shows about the minimum weekly dose of these three compounds required to sustain the hepatic metabolic environment you built across the 14 days. The mechanism I will walk through in that video involves a protein called FGF21, fibroblast growth factor 21, which the liver releases after sustained dietary intervention and which has downstream effects on adipose tissue that most people working on fat loss have never heard of. If this is the kind of content you want, every claim sourced, every number specific, no motivation speech, subscribe. It helps this channel reach the people who need this information and cannot find it assembled in one place anywhere else.